Hi, everyone. This is Sam Silverman, Managing Partner of EB-5AN. Thank you for taking time to join us on today's webinar. Today, we're going to be chatting about Bill of Rights for EB-5 investors, specifically 10 rights that every EB-5 investor should have. During the webinar, if you have questions, please use the chat box and we'll try and cover as many questions as we can at the end. If you'd like to get a copy of the slides, please email us at info@eb5an.com. And we're happy to send over a copy of the slides as well. So we'll skip over this introduction. So quickly about EB-5AN, we're a leading national EB-5 investment fund manager. We've been in the EB-5 space for over 10 years. We've worked with thousands of investors from more than 60 countries around the world. One of the things that we're really focused on as a company is 100% investment transparency. What does that mean? It means providing all the relevant investment and financial documents needed for investors to get a full financial picture of their investment before committing to a specific project. We've published many articles on how to conduct diligence on projects, what questions to ask, how to identify red flags, and a lot of those articles can be accessed on our website at eb5investments.com. And if you don't know where to start, just reach out to us and one of us will be able to give you a list and help point you in the right direction to get started. As I mentioned earlier, I'm Sam Silverman, one of the two managing partners at EB-5AN. A little bit about my bio background is there on the left-hand side of the screen, and joined today by Mike Schoenfeld, the other managing partner, and I'll let Mike jump in and share a little bit about his experience and background and why we decided to start EB-5AN more than 10 years ago.
Absolutely. Thanks, Sam, and appreciate everybody that's taking the time today. And prior to founding EB-5AN with Sam, I was at a large private equity firm, and we were both at the Boston Consulting Group before that. And one of our goals has been to bring transparency and institutional best practices to the industry. And this webinar actually builds on exactly why we got into the industry. We think it's important for investors to be treated similar to normal private equity investors in large investments, and that's been our focus. And to date, we've had 100% success on all of our projects. All jobs have been created. They've all been USCIS approved. No issues in terms of repayment or loans falling out of compliance. We're just really proud on what we've brought to the industry over the past decade.
Perfect. Thanks, Mike. And also with us today, we have the pleasure of having Ahmed Khan, a top EB-5 immigration attorney who we were able to recruit to join EB-5AN. And I'll let Ahmed jump in and share a little bit about his background and experience, and then we'll jump into some of the main content.
Yeah, thanks, Sam. Thanks for having me on. And yeah, so my name is Ahmed. As Sam mentioned, before joining EB-5AN, I spent several years at some of the top law firms in the EB-5 and immigration space in general. After that, I also worked as an executive at one of the top regional centers, and then ultimately decided to join EB-5AN. Mike and Sam and I have worked together for over a decade, and yeah, very happy to be here and looking forward to explaining some more of what we do and you know what we suggest for people who are getting into this process during this webinar.
So very quickly, one of the things that makes us a little bit unique in the EB-5 space is our regional center network. We cover the entire country, which means that we can select any project anywhere in the country for EB-5, which gives us the ability to select and really look for the best projects because we're not geographically restricted in any way. Here's a map showing where many of our investors have come from over the years. And we've been fortunate enough to be featured in many of the leading publications on articles related to EB-5 over the last 10 years. So first, a quick introduction for the inspiration for this webinar and this topic in general. For those who were not born or raised in the United States, the Bill of Rights was a critical collection of rights that was ratified many years ago, hundreds of years ago. And generally, the goal with these rights is to safeguard U.S. citizens' rights freedom of religion, freedom to bear arms, etc. And so the concept is that as EB-5 investors considering investments in the US, we believe there's a framework, a kind of standard set of rights that investors should be provided with. And you can be assured that EB-5AN provides all of these rights to its investors. Other regional centers probably provide some. We haven't encountered many that provide, if any, that have provided all of them. But these are kind of the first, kind of foundational 10 rights that we believe are critical for investors to be aware of, number one, and then seek out, make sure that the project or regional center that you're considering is going to provide you with these rights without any questions. Okay, so first, what are these rights? So there are 10 of them. So I'll quickly read through these and then we'll dive in one by one. So the first right, to speak directly with the regional center or sponsor principals and have your questions answered in writing. The second right, the right to personally visit the project site before investing. The third right, the right to transparency about conflicts of interest between the sponsor, the regional center, and the developer. The fourth right, the right to hire an independent immigration attorney. The fifth right, the right to review financial statements of the project company, and if applicable, the guarantor before investing. The sixth right, the right to review the project's I-956F filing package. The seventh right, the right to information on the regional centers and the developer's track records, successes, and failures. The eighth right, the right to know SEC complaints or litigation against the regional center. The ninth right, the right to receive quarterly reports on the project. And the 10th right, the right to review financial documents illustrating the flow of your investment funds. All right, so the first right that we'll discuss, again, the right to speak directly with the regional center or sponsor principals and have your questions answered in writing. So Mike, do you want to tell us a little bit about this right and why this is really important for EB-5 investors, given the complexity and detailed nuances of how EB-5 works?
Absolutely. And investors choose projects in a variety of different ways, whether they're using an immigration advisor or agency who's vetted the project on their behalf or coming directly to the regional center and project. In either way, investors should always have the right to directly speak to the group that is structuring and managing the deal. That's just fundamental to gain an understanding of the project. If you're not able to reach the group that's going to be in charge of your money for the next 3 to 7 years, you might have a problem. And if you can't reach them before you invest, imagine how hard it will be to get in touch with them after you invest. So I would say that that's one thing. And as busy as everybody is, Sam and I will always speak directly to potential investors. I don't think there's any better use of my time than getting to know a potential investor, being able to directly answer questions. Some people choose to use sales teams, which is completely fine, but you should be able to speak to the person that was in charge of diligence and structuring the project at the end of the day. And in addition to that, it also comes with getting your questions answered in writing. When things go right in a project, everything's great. If things go wrong, you want to make sure that everything you were told does in fact appear in the PPM, or if you're being told something different that you don't understand or isn't in the PPM, get that in writing and have an exact explanation of what's being told to you. Do not just take on face value what's being said verbally if somebody is trying to sell you a financial product. So with that, I'll pass it over to Ahmed to see if he has anything else to add, but I think that this is one of the most important ones of just very basic communication.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with you, Mike. And I think the only other thing that I would add to that is it's a little bit of a two-way street, right? A regional center is only as good as the folks who are kind of running it. And the more you speak with potential investors or past investors, the more each regional center sponsor has an idea or a principal has an idea of what the market is looking for. What are the priorities for the people who are actually looking to invest? And I think Mike and Sam over the years have done a great job of testing the market, understanding what investors are looking for, and then going out and structuring projects that meet those needs. So it's definitely a two-way street. And yeah, this is definitely a undervalued aspect of any EB-5 regional center due diligence.
All right, great. Thank you, Ahmed. All right, so moving on to number two. So the right to personally visit the project site before investing. So as with any investment, you wouldn't buy a $800,000 house without going to see it in person, walking around, looking at the roof, taking a walk around, making sure everything looks good. Same thing with the project. Before you decide to make, nearly $1 million investment, always a good idea to go see it in person. Why is that important? Because at the end of the day, for you to get your capital back, on time and in full, right, and not lose any money, the underlying project that you're investing in, it needs to be economically successful, right? What does that mean? It needs to actually make money, right? If you lend to a business and it makes money and is successful, that's going to cure all of the problems. Jobs are going to be created, money is going to be repaid, everything's going to go great. And so to get a better idea of if a project's underlying business model is going to be financially successful, you can go visit it in person and come to that analysis and decision yourself, right? Especially when it comes to for sale real estate. It's very difficult to look at photos in a spreadsheet and really get a feeling for if homes or apartments or condos at a particular site are going to sell or rent well, right? You've got to really walk the perimeter. Is this an area that's been, really struggling with crime and homelessness? Do you feel safe walking outside the building and in the immediately surrounding area, or do you not feel safe, right? Are residents there now walking around? What does the local area look like? How far of a walk is it to the grocery store, the pharmacy? What does it look like on the ground? We've been doing project site visits for over 10 years now. We have two visits coming up, one on March 16th, Saturday, at our Twin Lakes project in Georgia, and another one on May 19th at our Boynton Beach project in Florida. And we regularly hold visits like this several times a year. We just also did one in Colorado at our Keystone project, so that investors, attorneys, and brokers have a chance to come see it in person, get a construction tour, and really understand what's happening on site. Ahmed, what other comments do you have?
Yeah, no, I think all those are great points, and obviously it's very important to see what if you're putting up this kind of money, you want to be able to see where your money is going, right? That just makes sense. I think the other important aspect of site visits that a lot of investors can enjoy is being able to meet with either the sales or the development team on site, right? There's no better way to get a gauge of what the market is like for a particular project than to ask people who are on the ground. And, we can definitely set up site visits all we want, but a really good advantage for a lot of our projects is investors can just show up unannounced at some of these projects, go there, deal with the staff, speak with the staff, and basically get their perspective on how the project is doing, how sales are going, how it's moving forward. And that should give them a really good perspective on how the project is going to be in the future.
And one thing that I'd add here is not every regional center will have an office or a regional center representative on site all the time. That's actually not usually the case. In our case, we're not the developer. We're not on site every day. So I'd say it's important to understand and have expectations of if we have 5 different projects in the U.S. going on at once, there's not always going to be a team member available to show you around. It may happen, it may not, which is why we try and coordinate larger visits that are pre-planned. But for sale real estate projects, it's usually quite easy to go and meet the team that's selling the real estate, and they'll know a little bit about EB-5. They won't know all the details, and it's not their job to know how the project's being financed. But it is always a great idea to go and visit the site and see, hey, if I'm investing in this hotel and condominium project that I'm being told is at a great ski resort, you might want to go and see, is it a busy ski resort? Will there be people staying there? And just do some common sense diligence as well.
Great. All right, moving on to the third right. So the right to transparency about conflicts of interest between the sponsor, the regional center, and the developer. And this is probably one of the most important rights, because it's an area where historically a lot of investors have lost money in projects because they failed to really recognize how dangerous a conflict of interest can be. Ahmed, you've been in the space for a long time. You've seen, a lot of projects go well. You've seen some projects go not so well. Tell us kind of what is this conflict of interest, and why is it so critical now that it's required to be disclosed? That even though investors can now see it, how do you go from, okay, there is a conflict here, to actually internalizing how real or significant of a risk it really can be to an investment?
Yeah, absolutely. And as you're looking through a project's offering documents, one of the key things to pay attention to is, okay, who are the different entities here, right? Who's involved? Who is the regional center? Who is this project sponsor, and who's the ultimate developer? And it's such a key point, of the due diligence process, to understand who's going to be basically working on your behalf and who's going to be looking after their best interests, right? And at the end of the day, you should be assuming, just like yourself as an investor, when you're doing due diligence, you're looking after yourself, you're looking after your best interest. So will every other party involved within this transaction, okay? And so what happens is, when you're expecting, the regional center program was created by USCIS to act on investors' behalf, right? The regional center acts as a conduit between investors who are looking to get their green card, and then developers who are in the United States putting together these projects. And it's the regional center's job to ensure that everything goes according to plan, right? That everything goes well, that the investors get their green cards on one piece, and then also that they're putting together projects in a responsible, safe way, so that the investors have a chance at getting their money back as well, right? Now, what happens if two of these parties become one? So one of the most common conflicts of interest we'll see is where a regional center is also the developer of the deal, right? So now the investor is placing their money into the hands of the regional center, who's going to be responsible for it, but the regional center themselves are taking the money for the development. So if the development goes south, they're unable to basically pay back the new commercial enterprise, which the regional center is in control of. Who is going to sue on behalf of the investors to get that money back? They're certainly not going to sue themselves, right? And so this is what has led to a lot of big problems in the past, is investors are just left with no recourse, because whereas the regional center should be acting on their behalf and really trying to look after their rights, that's not happening, because they're also the developer, and they're certainly not going to shoot themselves in the foot, so to speak, on behalf of the investor.
Yep, exactly. Go ahead, Mike.
And I just add there, and we had another webinar where we discussed this in detail, is that if everything goes right, quite often the conflicts of interest really don't matter. If everybody's winning, they're winning together. You really just find the conflicts, and where this is the most exposed is when things go wrong and there's a downside event. Because if somebody's on both sides of the transaction, and their money's on one side and your money's on the other, and they're in control of it, human nature, they're going to act in their best interest, not in yours. So again, there can be very good deals where the developer is the regional center, and that absolutely works. It should be disclosed. You should understand the risk and what type of separation there is. And that's why we put it in the Bill of Rights, because understanding what that conflict is and how it's going to be managed is critical if there is a conflict.
Yep, exactly. All right, moving on to the next right, number 4, the right to hire an independent immigration attorney. So when an investor selects an EB-5 project, one of the first steps is to engage an immigration attorney to work with them to document their source of funds. So proving how their funds were legally obtained. Bank statements, tax records, tax returns, loan documents, all those documents and records that show the money was accumulated legally, those are typically prepared by an immigration attorney. So Ahmed, why is it so critical? You are an immigration attorney. You've represented almost 1,000 EB-5 investors in the past. Why is this so important?
Yep, this goes right back to what we were just talking about in terms of conflict of interest, right? And Mike brought up a great point. Like, when things go wrong, who's going to go bat for you as an investor, right? Who's going to take up your flag and basically try to get you your money back and get you your green card? And this is that latter point, right? Getting your green card. This is why you're doing this investment. And that is where this immigration attorney plays such a key role, right? And what a lot of investors don't realize is things can go wrong in a project and you can still get your green card, right? You can still get your green card out of the whole transaction. You may, lose a little bit of money or even all of your money, but there's still an opportunity to get your green card. And who's really going to look after you to do that? The immigration attorney. So it's really essential that you have an immigration attorney who's not going to be torn between choosing to represent you as the investor or choosing to represent the regional center that you've invested into, right? If they're representing both of you, they may be pulled from both sides and say, okay, well, maybe this is in the regional center's best interest, but not the investors. How can they choose that, right? So you definitely want to make sure that you've got someone who's completely, batting just for you, who's going up on your behalf and looking after your best interests. And the immigration attorney is probably the most important person in this entire ordeal because they're the ones who are going to make sure that no matter what else happens, you can get your green card out of this entire transaction.
And I think another aspect of this is that most immigration attorneys, to prepare the EB-5 application, most of them charge about the same amount of money. It's not like some are charging, triple and others are charging, much less. They all charge about the same amount. And so, the question then becomes, well, okay, if they're all charging about the same amount of money, then why would anyone hire an attorney that has this conflict of interest when you can just simply hire one that doesn't? And the answer is that's exactly right. You should always not hire an attorney that has a conflict because it's going to be very easy to find one at about the same cost that doesn't have this conflict. Where investors get tripped up is that, there may be some very small fine print in an immigration attorney's contract that says something like, I also represent the regional center and they've paid me hundreds of thousands of dollars over the last 10 years. And you acknowledge this conflict and yet you're still going to hire me. And the attorney may have told the client, there is no conflict, but then, the document says differently, right? So that's why it's always critical to, really confirm that in writing. And when in doubt, just pick an independent attorney. Very simple. And, we're happy to provide a list of many, many attorneys, none of whom have, ever taken money from EB-5AN. And who are experienced and are completely independent. So we don't require any immigration attorney, to prepare applications for our projects. Each investor is allowed to select any attorney they like, complete freedom, no restrictions whatsoever. Okay, number 5, the right to review financial statements of the project company and, if applicable, the guarantor before investing. Mike, since you've been in institutional finance and investing, why don't you kind of share our approach on this and why this is so critical, despite the fact that almost no other regional centers are providing this?
Yeah, and it comes down to, yes, this is an investment for an immigration benefit. So the EB-5 green card is the main focus. But at the end of the day, you're also just making an $800,000 investment itself. And this investment, although it's typically structured a little bit differently because the main goal is immigration, is still the same as any other private placement that you would be investing in as a retail investor, such as investing in the equity of a real estate development without EB-5. Very similarly. So with the variety of projects out there in the EB-5 industry, some are real estate, some are operational businesses. There's plenty of different choices. It's important to just step back and look at it as, if I was investing my money with the goal of getting my green card and not losing the money, like, what do I need to see? And you want to see as much detail on the financial statements as you can. If the project is already ongoing, great. You can review the construction contract and see that there's a maximum price. You can review the pro forma in the budget and understand what the business plan actually looks like for the project and what the exit is. So it's important just not to take somebody on their word, but to go in, double click, understand what's there. And if a project is already operating and profitable, great. You can see the financial statements and understand how the project is structured. So It's just pretty pictures only go so far. A book of renderings doesn't really tell you how the project's going to perform. But when you dig into the meat of what do the financials look like, what do the comparables look like, it you can get to the answer. And unfortunately, not everybody is a financially sophisticated investor that's done this many times. So it's important. A lot of times our investors rely on friends and family members that are in the finance industry to take a second look and things like that. It's challenging in this industry, unfortunately, to find an independent like financial representative that's really evaluating these projects on your behalf. I wish there was an easy answer for that. There are some people that issue project reports, but it's a little hard to find. But just in general, it's critical to look at the documents yourself and understand that pretty renderings don't necessarily translate to a successful investment.
Exactly. Yeah, it's really important to just look at the numbers, look at the data. If a project has an entity guaranteeing the repayment of the money, that sounds good, but you've got to look at, okay, what does that entity own? How many assets does it have? How much debt does it have? Is that really something that's going to help increase the likelihood of me getting my money back or not, right? And like Mike said, everyone may not be, very financially sophisticated when it comes to reviewing financial statements, but just the simple question of, okay, I see the project, looks good. Can you send me the financial statements? If the answer is no, we can't, that's bad news, right? That's a red flag, right? Even if you can't understand it, the fact that they're not even willing to share the financial statements, which is a core diligence item in any investment transaction, that's a major red flag and should give you serious pause as to invest in a project like that.
Yeah, and just to add to that, Sam, I was going to say, along with what Mike mentioned, this kind of ties back into one of the first things we talked about, the first right, which is the ability to speak with the sponsors and principals at a regional center. You don't have to be financially savvy to kind of go through the numbers and be able to identify what you might think is a red flag or something that just raises a question in your mind. You shouldn't ever hesitate to ask those questions back to the regional center. And that's what the regional center representatives' jobs are, right? To basically answer those questions and provide you with the comfort that you would want before making any investment. So always be asking questions and let regional centers explain to you about anything that you don't understand within these documents.
Yep, exactly. Yep. All right, number 6, the right to review the project's I-956F filing package. Ahmed, do you want to walk us through this one and explain what is the 956F and why it's important for investors to be able to review those documents?
Yeah, absolutely. So the 956F is one of the products of the Reform and Integrity Act passed in 2022. It basically replaced the old Form 924, which was an exemplar. And the function of this form is essentially to provide USCIS all of the project documents on the immigration side that they would need to approve the project itself, and then later on an investor's application for the 526E. Okay, so what this application does is it puts all of the project related information in front of USCIS, and this plays two very key roles, right? One, it allows USCIS to view the documents pertaining to the project before investors are able to get their money into the project itself. And then two, it basically streamlines the process because once a 956F has been approved, all of the investors in the project that have already invested, all they need to worry about is their source of funds, right? So as long as their source of funds are up to par with USCIS requirements, they don't have to worry about the project portion of the application anymore. They're going to be approved. Okay, so when you're looking through a 956F filing package and having this available to you from the regional center, this should give you a lot of comfort as to what's contained in the business plan for the project, what the economic analysis report, which is where the job creation numbers come from, how the regional center determined whether or not it was in a rural, high unemployment or unreserved area. All of those things are going to be kind of laid bare for you to review. And I think one of the great advantages, right, of the 956F filings is that they're going to USCIS, right? And USCIS adjudicators are not, coming from high-level banking or finance world or, they're not always attorneys. They're trained to read these packages and understand what's going on in them, but the facts that are presented to them are presented in a very easy manner to understand, right? We want the adjudicators to know exactly what they're looking for and where to find it. And similarly, an EB-5 investor who would be looking through this package would have that framework, right? They'd be able to look at the way that the regional center has structured everything, has presented this information, and it's in a very easy to read and easy to kind of peruse through format in terms of what you may be looking for. And as an investor on the immigration side, where you could find certain information that'll give you the comfort that this project will be approved in the future.
Great, great. All right, number 7. So the right to information on the regional centers and the developer's track record, successes and failures.
So yeah, I think that
investment. So one of the most important aspects of. Go ahead, Mike.
Oh, so sorry, my audio had cut out. I didn't hear you starting, but just to throw one point in before Sam picks it up is that, so just like any real estate development or any other investment, past performance doesn't necessarily translate to future performance, but it's a pretty good indication. If somebody's done the same thing successfully 20 times in a row, it's very likely their 21st time doing that exact thing will be successful compared to somebody that's only done it once or twice. So when you're looking at anything, whether it's a regional center's track record of have they gotten projects approved? Have they actually created the jobs? Or on the developer side of what are they building? Have they built this exact same thing 50 times before and it's just rinse and repeat? Or are they trying to figure it out for the first time? That's just one of those things that I would focus on as, of course, the project itself matters, but historical is a pretty good representation of whether someone knows what they're doing on both the development and the regional center side.
Yes, exactly. As we look at projects today, many EB-5 projects are structured as loans. And so when you evaluate a project that's structured as a loan, the most important criteria is the quality of the borrower, right? So how many loans has this borrower taken on over what period of time? How many similar projects have they borrowed money on where they've been able to execute successfully, repay the loans on time, and not default, right? At the end of the day, the regional center is really just a pass-through company. So it pools EB-5 money together and then it loans it out to a developer. And then as long as the developer repays the money, repays the loan, the regional center then just hands that money back to the individual investors. So the real underlying investment risk is not really in the regional center. It's really the developer's ability to execute and to repay debt. That's really critical. Ahmed, I'll let you jump in.
Yep, exactly. I was just going to expand on that point a little bit, going back to something that we talked about earlier in terms of avoiding conflicts of interest, right, between regional centers and developers. This is where a regional center's track record really comes into play, right? As Mike mentioned earlier, when things go well, things are going according to plan, there's not much worries in the world. But when things go wrong, you want to know how the regional center is going to act on your behalf. So, aside from looking at the track record, you really want to ask those questions and understand, okay, in the event that something does go south with this current project that I'm looking at, has the regional center dealt with this in the past? And if they did, what were their actions taken at that time? And just asking them, right? Like, what if this were to happen? Here's the hypothetical. What would you do? And I think that speaks a lot to the regional center's abilities and roles, that they play in every investment to basically make sure that the investor is taken care of both financially and on the immigration side of things.
Yep, exactly. Look at the regional center's track record and then look at the borrower. Who's borrowing the money and what is their track record portfolio look like? All right, number 8. So SEC complaints or litigation against the regional center. The U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission, or SEC, it often litigates against parties that violate laws and rules failure to disclose information to EB-5 investors or misuse of EB-5 funds, for example. So obviously you want to know, has the SEC, investigated, filed lawsuits against the regional center or the project in the past? Any projects that have been involved. There are EB-5 companies that have faced SEC issues. They're all public. So yeah, just ask, and it's usually a bad sign. But this information is public. You just need to ask for it, and it's available. Ahmed?
Yeah, I think I would just add to that look, the SEC, so every regional center who's putting together these private placements and these opportunities to invest, these are all securities, right? So the SEC ultimately governs and applies all of its rules to any security that's being sold in the United States, including EB-5 investment. So one of the things that I would point out is, if you've seen litigation and, or any kind of fine that's occurred from the SEC against a regional center, that took a while to get to that point. The SEC doesn't just pick up and fine random people one time. They build a case, they kind of, give multiple opportunities, and then ultimately reaches a point where they can't be ignored any longer. So for it to have gotten to that point where they had to, either indict or litigate or fine someone, just know that there's usually an underlying history of that activity that led to that final kind of straw that broke the camel's back, if you will.
Yep, exactly. So yeah, just another item that you want to be aware of that can only help you make a more informed decision. All right, number 9, right to receive quarterly reports on the project. Mike, do you want to kind of walk us through why this is important and how we approach this ongoing reporting for our funds?
Yeah, most private equity funds or hedge funds or any other place where you're investing a substantial amount of money in a private investment, they issue quarterly reports to their limited partners. What's gone well, what hasn't, status of the investment, if it's real estate, status of the construction, giving updates. And although you aren't always going to hear every week on what's going on with the project, you should at least be getting updates quarterly. And what we like to include are at least job updates. How many jobs have been created? If it's a for sale project, how many units have been sold? How is that going? And then everything else related to the project in terms of spend. And you can really get a nice snapshot of what's happening pretty simply in a couple of pages related to the project. And I think it's just as important to communicate if things are not going well, if you're behind schedule, on the reasoning why, to keep investors comfortable with what's going on. And we just think that's an industry best practice that everyone should expect to receive frequent updates about where their money went and what jobs it's creating.
Exactly, yeah. With any EB-5 investment, you've got, where's the money gone? How is it being used? And then also the job creation. So how many jobs have been created? What does the projection look like? How many homes have been sold? All those details should be available on a regular basis to investors. All right, the final right. So the right to review financial documents illustrating the flow of your investment funds. Generally, the idea here is that when money gets transferred to the project's escrow account, it then gets advanced down to the NCE, the new commercial enterprise, and then from there, it typically goes into the project. So there are a few steps where money is moving after it's first transferred by the investor to the escrow account. And so this is really important for an investor to really just understand, okay, where is my money right now? And show me how it's moved from, step A, step B, step C, right? Just to make sure that the money is where it's supposed to be, and everything is okay and it's flowed correctly. This is very, very basic, and it's really just to make sure that the money has flowed, in accordance with the documents that the investors already agreed to. So an unwillingness to share this data is really a bad sign that either money may be being used fraudulently or wasn't properly transferred. So just very basic kind of table stakes information that investors should get access to. And also critical for EB-5 program green card purposes as well, to show that the money was transferred correctly and can be linked to job creation in the project. And I'll let Ahmed jump in and kind of address that point a little bit more.
Yep, exactly. So, one of the key again, we go back to what the main objective of this investment is, and sure, getting your money back is very important, but you're ultimately doing this for the green card. And the number one thing, right, beyond the project, kind of the way it's set up and how everything is kind of put together, is will it create jobs? And that job creation is ultimately what leads to you getting a permanent green card through this EB-5 process as an investor. Okay, and understanding the flow of funds through the project and how it's ultimately expended, whether it's to pay back bridge financing or whether it's to pay hard construction costs, or maybe it's going into some other costs. It's really, really important, because that's ultimately what leads to job creation, right? A lot of investors don't understand how EB-5 job creation works, and I would recommend going through and looking at the economic impact analysis that's included in any I-956F filing, right? We talked about that already. That's going to dictate kind of, okay, here is what the input is, and the input would be expenditure of EB-5 capital into certain aspects of the project, and how that input then leads to an output, which in this case is jobs. Okay, so super important to know how your money is going to be used. There's always going to be some kind of red flags that come up if it's not being used in a very straightforward fashion, right? If it's going into, let's say, to pay off bridge financing, that's allowed. USCIS has given us guidance on that, but it has to be done in a very specific fashion, right? So you want to make sure that it's meeting that criteria so you still get that job creation benefit. Okay, if it's going into hard construction costs, this is one of the easiest ways, right? But again, you want to make sure that 100% of your capital is being spent according to the business plan on hard construction costs as promised. So yeah, these are really, really important aspects that are sometimes overlooked. Seems like a small thing and kind of a foregone conclusion that, oh yeah, I'm giving my money to the project, but it's important how you're giving that money to the project and where the project is using your funds very specifically, because although the 526E is important, the IA-29, where USCIS really digs into this, is just as important, right? That's what determines whether or not you get a permanent green card. So this right cannot be understated for sure.
Great, thank you, Ahmed. All right, so before we wrap up, we'll spend just a few minutes chatting about some of our current EB-5 projects, and then we'll wrap it up. Mike, do you want to start with walking us through some of our rural projects that we have open right now?
Yeah, and I'd say on this slide, you'll see that we're actually showing 5 different EB-5 investment offerings. So since the passage of the RIA, it's no longer a one-size-fits-all world. There's different investors with different preferences. So for example, we have 2 urban TEA deals. One of them's equity, one of them's a loan model. And then we have 3 different rural EB-5 deals that qualify for the 20% visa set-asides. So to very quickly touch on them, there's a lot of similarities in the way that we structure them in terms of our diligence and ensuring first that we get the green card, and second, that we have a full return to capital for investors. But every deal is a little bit different. So the first project that I'll go through is the Twin Lakes, Georgia loan project. This has been one of our most popular deals. It is a rural deal right outside of Atlanta, Georgia. A large master plan neighborhood is being built by the Coulter Group. It's 1,300 homes. They've already sold over 600 homes and already built and finished over 400 homes in the neighborhood. So they've created thousands of EB-5 eligible jobs and thousands more to go. And for all of those reasons, this has been an extremely popular deal for the EB-5 program. The second project is a little different, where it is a hotel and a condominium development right at the base of the main gondola at the Keystone Ski Resort. This deal is also about halfway built. They've pre-sold 70% of the condos. Enough jobs have already been created for all of the EB-5 investors in this deal as well. And once the condominiums close and the construction loan is repaid, the EB-5 actually becomes senior with a recorded mortgage on the deal. So very simple and clean security, and another great rural deal. The last deal I'm going to mention on the rural side is the Wahali project. This project we already have I-526Es approved on, and the I-956F is pre-approved. This is a large new neighborhood right outside of Park City, Utah, where they've already completed the golf course, the first amenity, and are starting on the first set of residential units. So it's a little earlier on in its construction life cycle, but it's extremely well positioned, and we have a senior mortgage on a vast majority of the project. And as I mentioned, we can go in much more detail on any of these projects. They're all well underwritten, great deals, each with a little bit different a flavor. And with that, I'll kind of pause after the rural and pass it back to Sam to discuss the two different urban TEA options that we have.
Yep, thanks, Mike. So we also have two different urban TEA offerings. They're both investments in the same project, Boynton Beach multifamily, also being developed by the Coulter Group. This is a new 210 unit Class A active adult multifamily project located in South Florida in Boynton Beach, very close to the ocean. This is a shorter loan term, 3-year loan term for the loan option with a 1-year optional extension. Coulter has been developing real estate for almost 30 years. They've never failed to repay a loan or to complete a project ever. And this project is targeting the active adult market in Boynton Beach, which has one of the highest concentrations of wealthy active adult seniors in the entire United States. So very, very compelling project, not rural, so not going to result in the fastest green card possible, but it does have a shorter investment period. So for investors who are more concerned about getting funds back sooner or getting a higher return, higher yield on their investment, the Boynton Beach project is a great option to consider as well. All right, and with that, we'll wrap it up. If you're interested in getting more details, chatting with our team, have questions about project due diligence, or want to come for a site visit, or have other questions, or want to get access to the full set of documents for any of our projects, please use this QR code, scan it, schedule a call with us. Mike or I or Ahmed will be happy to chat with you about any questions that you have. And Ahmed, any final thoughts before we conclude?
No, I think we've covered a lot of the basics of, going through the due diligence process, right? Of what you should be looking for from any regional center. It's definitely a tough process for any EB-5 investor. It's daunting when you first start out, but we're here to help. So yeah, definitely, like Sam mentioned, reach out to us. We're happy to provide knowledge and assistance as you're kind of going through and you don't know where to look. We'll at least give you that much, right? We'll tell you where to start looking, and that will lead to I think a much better and smoother due diligence process. So yeah, reach out to us and we're happy to help.
Mike, anything else before we wrap up?
Nope, appreciate everybody's time. I think this was a great session, and just, again, focusing on transparency, helping investors learn what to ask and what to look for. So thanks again, everyone, and hopefully we'll hear from you soon.
Yep, thank you, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.